Tonight on The ReidOut.
He said more people voted in Philadelphia than there were voters. And that was absolute rubbish.
And I said something to the effect of, sir, we've done dozens of investigations, hundreds of interviews. The major allegations are not supported by the evidence developed.
Lie, cheat, and steal. Testimony today at the second January 6th hearing reveals that Trump knew he lost, but tried to steal the election anyway, while cheating his MAGA supporters out of their hard-earned money. Plus, some are calling the gun reform framework a good first step. That suggests more is coming. Color me skeptical. We'll talk about all of that and more with Karine Jean-Pierre in her first live primetime interview since she made history, becoming the new White House press secretary. But we begin with day 2 of public hearings by the House January 6th committee. Today, showing how Donald Trump deliberately launched the big lie to convince his own voters that he won an election he lost, using claims of non-existent fraud, and then seeking to corrupt the Justice Department, his own campaign team, his donors, and our court system in an effort to cling to power. And if you think he cooked up that plan after the election as a Hail Mary because he simply couldn't accept defeat, understand that Donald Trump went into the election already planning to lie about the outcome, having laid the groundwork for months.
Mail ballots are a very dangerous thing for this country because they're cheaters. When you do all mail-in voting ballots, you're asking for fraud. The only way we're going to lose this election is if the election is rigged. Remember that. I've been complaining very strongly about the ballots, and the ballots are a disaster. Get rid of the ballots, and we'll have a very peaceful. There won't be a transfer, frankly. There'll be a continuation. This is going to be a fraud like you've never seen.
And then on election night, despite being told by numerous advisors, all diehard Republicans, whose testimony we heard, that it was too early to declare victory since votes were still being counted and the predicted outcome, frankly, didn't look favorable for him, Trump did it anyway, falsely claiming that the election was stolen. Today, we learned more about who was advising him to make that claim from former campaign advisor Jason Miller, including this revelation about that individual's condition at the time.
Mayor was definitely intoxicated, but I do not know his level of intoxication when he spoke with the president, for example. Effectively, Mayor Giuliani was saying, we won it. They're stealing it from us. Where'd all the votes come from? We need to go say that we won. And essentially that anyone who didn't agree with that position was being weak.
An attorney for Rudy Giuliani denied he was drinking that night, but we heard Giuliani on tape telling the committee he did speak to the former president several times on election night and in the days that followed. The increasingly farcical claims by Rudy and Trump lawyer Sidney Powell took center stage in the former president's mind, despite being told the truth by basically everybody else, from his numbers guys to his campaign manager, Bill Stepien, and his own White House lawyers.
I didn't mind being categorized. There were two groups of them. We called them kind of my team and Rudy's team. I didn't mind being characterized as being part of Team Normal, as reporters, kind of started to do around that point in time. I didn't think what was happening was necessarily honest or professional at that point in time.
What they were proposing, I thought was nuts. And the theory was also completely nuts.
Even his extravagantly loyal Attorney General, William Barr, told Trump that there was no fraud, specifically adding that false claims about Dominion voting systems, which have since gotten Giuliani and Powell sued, were ludicrous.
I told him that the stuff that his people were shoveling out to the public was bull. I mean, that the claims of fraud were bull. I thought, boy, if he really believes this stuff, he has, lost contact with he's become detached from reality if he really believes this stuff. When I went into this and would, tell him how crazy some of these allegations were, there was never an indication of interest in what the actual facts were.
In fact, Trump's claims in the immediate aftermath of the election were so bizarre. Former Fox News political editor Chris Stirewalt put it this way.
After the election, as of November 7th, In your judgment, what were the chances of President Trump winning the election?
After that point?
Yes.
None. The idea that through any normal process in any of these states, remember, he had to do it thrice, right? He needed 3 of these states to change. And in order to do that, I mean, you're at an infant, you're better off to play the Powerball.
Despite knowing full well that his claims were a lie, Trump still began marketing the snake oil of a stolen election, starting from his first post-election interview, an interview Bill Barr referenced in his testimony.
Everybody said, this is over. I'm telling you, at 10 o'clock, everybody thought it was over. And then the phony mail-in started coming in, Maria. But just so you understand, I got 74 million votes. It was over. And then mail-in started happening. Glitches started happening. This election was rigged. This election is a total fraud.
Now, after months of those lies, by January 6th, the train had left the station, and millions of Trump supporters had been infected by the big lie, with a mob primed and ready to march on the Capitol.
200,000 people that weren't even registered voted. 430,000 votes disappeared from President Trump's tally, and you can't stand there and tell me that it worked.
I don't want to say that what we're doing is right, but if the election is being stolen, what is it going to take?
Joining me now is Yamiche Alcindor, anchor and moderator of Washington Week on PBS and an MSNBC Washington correspondent. Jill Wine-Banks, former assistant Watergate special prosecutor and an MSNBC legal analyst. And Kurt Bardella, advisor to the DNC and the DCCC. Thank you all for being here. Yamiche, I want to start with you. We did hear today, at least, that Merrick Garland has stated that his prosecutors are watching. They are paying attention to what's going on. My question is, how much of Capitol Hill, particularly Capitol Hill Republicans, are paying attention to this? We know Fox News actually did carry this today, and we know that's what plays in their TVs in their offices. If significant numbers of Republicans were watching, what's been the reaction?
Well, from my conversations with Republicans today, people are watching. This was really a black box being opened into the White House with people really hearing from the people that were closest to President Trump, who were warning him that his lie could not metastasize, and then watching it metastasize. And you also heard from people, this shrinking inner circle that basically said, I can no longer be part of this. So I was texting with one Trump aide in particular who had literally traveled to different states trying to convince people that the election had been rigged. Today, he told me that this really looked like President Trump was, quote, extremely culpable. And also it made him seem as though he's someone who is now chasing a fool's dream, that anybody who's going down this road with President Trump is continuing to really just believe in things that are not going to happen at all, and that it's actually pretty dangerous. I also want to note really quickly that this was also a fundraising aspect of this. President Trump has become a fundraising giant. So a lot of the Republicans I talked to pointed out that this is still politically viable for President Trump and the people who are sticking with him to support this lie. That being said, there are a lot of lies, but I don't know if that there are going to be a lot of minds changed, Joy.
Of course, because they're also using it as an excuse to pass restrictive voting laws. The big lie has been helpful for all Republicans up and down the aisle, or up and down the ballot. But Jill Wine-Banks, the other thing, and I think that's very important to note here, and we sort of got into that a little bit in the open, is that it's not as if Trump suddenly woke up after the November 3rd election and started to believe the big lie. He was already setting up to do the big lie, and in fact, it's his history, right? It's what he does. He says that any election where he doesn't like the outcome is stolen. He claimed that, it was undocumented immigrants who elected Barack Obama. That wasn't real. With Hillary Clinton, he was already setting up to say that this election was going to be stolen. He even said that the election in Iowa, when he lost to Ted Cruz, was stolen. He said, Ted Cruz, that was stolen. That was fraud. So it is a pattern. So there's no way that any Republican or anybody other than, I guess, his voters could say that this was something new, right?
You cannot say it's something new. And I think what was shown today was very compelling evidence that proves that he knew that it was a big lie. He knew the truth, and he can't use his lack of knowledge as a defense in this case. The jury, if there were a criminal case, would be instructed that willful ignorance of the facts is not a defense. And especially when the only person or persons who were giving him the information that it was okay, that he hadn't lost, was an inebriated Rudy Giuliani and Kraken lawyer Sidney Powell, whereas everybody else from his campaign his attorney general, all of the people that were surrounding him who had a reason to be advising him, who were actual employees, all said, you lost and there is no fraud. So it's not a defense. And that's very important what they did today.